And we are live. Here we go. This is going to get posted on YouTube if you're away. So if you're ever away or if you're like lost on a lesson, my first advice is rewatch it, because being able to pause and rewind, kids tell me, does help. So this will be posted on my website, hopefully by about 4 p.m. today, give or take. I got a meeting after school, so it might not be there quite as fast. You know what? First thing you all want to do is put your name on it, right? Put your name on it, put your name on it, put your name on it. In lesson 1, I called the scientific process. Now, this is kind of a wishy-washy lesson. If I could, this is, ooh, someone's phone went off. We got to pause. What I was saying was, Giovanni, this is kind of a wishy-washy lesson. If I could design a science course, I would remove more stuff to teach you and make it much more, hey, let's go do lots of labs and experimenting. But this, I'm kind of paying lip service to this because I'm going to talk about the scientific process. But I got to be honest, pretty much every lab I give you is going to tell you what you're supposed to find, which is really not exploring. That's really pointing you in a direction and expecting you all to end up at the same place. So humor me as I pay lip service to the theory. Says this, the scientific process, first thing you want to do if you're trying to figure something out is to identify the problem or question. What you need to do is you need to decide what you want to measure. Figured it out now? You good, Mateo? This is how it'll work, right? So, for example, you have a question that you want to answer. Can you create a question about the following situations? And here's the first one I gave you. The relationship between sunscreen and sunburns. What might be a science-y question that you might want to come up with and be fairly obvious? Ooh. It's too obvious. I'll give you, this is what I would ask. This first thing I would like to know. Does sunscreen prevent sunburn? There's probably other questions you could ask about how often to apply it, about different types, different brands, but there would be a first science-y question, and then you would say, okay, how can I test that? How can I assess that? What kind of a procedure can I come up with such that I can convince myself that sunscreen does prevent sunburn? What might be a question that you might ask about the relationship between the degree of doneness and baking time for cookies? If you bake it longer, what might you hypothesize? Yeah. Okay, so if we put that in sciencey terms, I might say something like, sure, does longer baking time increase doneness? Now, I know it does, but there are questions in science that are less obvious than this, where you would be saying, does aspirin for adults prevent heart disease? How can we test that or not? Does sugar make kids more hyper or not? How can we test that or not? There are lots of questions that we have. This is where research heads. The relationship between oven temperature and length of time required to bake the cookies. What question might I ask? Hey, I might say, does oven temp, you know what, let's abbreviate temperature with temp period. By the way, I am good if you abbreviate things in your notes, if you find ways to write, come up with a system that works for you. I've never been someone who writes out full long words in my notes. Why? That's, if I can read it, I can read it, and that's all the goal is, right? So does oven temp affect baking time? Sure. Then you, after you have a question, you try to create a hypothesis. You go from wondering, to what do I think the answer is? In fact, a hypothesis really is an educated Guess. And why the first letter is green, I don't know. Let's try that again. So this is my tablet PC. My handwriting is atrocious, which is why you'll see I type most of my notes for you. If you can't read my writing, ask. I will never make fun of you for not being able to read my atrocious handwriting. It's gotten better over the years, which tells you how bad it really used to be. So a hypothesis is an educated guess. And what you're going to do is you're going to use that information to make a prediction. That's based on your observations. And if you're actually doing research in a lab, it's almost always in the form of if something, 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 then I think something, 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 something. You know, that sounds a little strange. If, you know what? Condition, then result. If this, then that. But we'll sound it a little fancier. If condition, then result. By the way, the other reason I do the shuffle is I know in the back row, this size is just big enough to read, barely right on the threshold. So it's easier to read in the front. But I can't make it much bigger. As an example, if I pinch my baby brother, then he will cry. If I study for a test, then I will do well. So I wrote here, create a hypothesis for the following situations in the form of if something, then something. So here's the question. I wonder what will happen if I only eat chocolate. What might you hypothesize? And I'll give you a hint. I think the first part is, if I only eat chocolate, then what? Kev?
You won't get the proper nutrition.
We can even shorten it with a three-letter word that begins with the letter F. Okay? I agree. You won't get proper nutrition. You know what? If I only eat chocolate, I'll get fat. You know what? That might be a fair hypothesis. It would be, by the way, probably a very fun hypothesis to test, but it would have negative long-term results as part of that test. So sure, if I only eat chocolate, I will get fat. Let's go a little more obscure, a little more abstract. Hey, I wonder what will happen if I mix red and yellow paint. Well, if I mix red and yellow paint, then is it yellow? Yep. Oh, my phone's ringing. Sorry, I can't control that. Give me a second here. No, so we're back. If I mix red paint and yellow paint, then you had a suggestion. You get? Orange. Okay. Now, by the way, I think red and yellow make orange, but you are allowed to hypothesize incorrectly because actually more of science right now is proving that something's not the case as much as proving. So I'm going to say this. Then I get blue, which I'm pretty sure you don't. There is nothing wrong with that hypothesis. If you ran the experiment, all you would say in your conclusion is, my hypothesis was wrong. And that's knowledge as well. So that's okay. The third thing that you would do is you would identify the variables. What are the variables? These are the things that change during the course of the experiment. Everything else ideally stays the same. So for example, in my paint example right above, what might some of the variables be? I think how much paint you use each time. So you might say, I'm always going to use the same size containers. I've removed that variable. The brand of paint, maybe different brands of paint mixed differently, different thicknesses of paint. So you would try and eliminate all those variables so that you could repeat this experiment over and over and over and over and over and know that the only thing that was changing was color. Not how much, not thickness, fancy word viscosity, not brand. You want to get rid of as many variables as you can. And that becomes very tough in any really good experiment, especially in medical experiments. How do you eliminate variables if you're doing an experiment or if you're surveying like 10,000 people, all of whom have different lifestyles and different ages and different jobs and different sleep patterns and different diets? It becomes very, very tough. So, two main ways of categorizing variables. Don't know if I can fit the typing on this line, so I'll have to write it. The first type is called the independent variable. What's the opposite of independent? Drop the in, sorry? Dependent. Okay? The independent one is also called the manipulated, and the dependent one is often called the responding, R-E-S-P-O-N-D-I-N-G, the responding variable. So let's go back to the baking doneness, okay? The independent variable would be how long I bake it for. The dependent variable would be how done the cookie is, because how done the cookie is depends on how long I bake it for, not the other way around. Okay. We talk about qualitative and quantitative variables, and unfortunately they both begin with QUA. I realize that, but I'm hoping in grade 9 your vocabulary is enough that you know the word quality and what that means, and you know the word quantity and what the quantity means, how many or how big. Quality means a characteristics.
Please excuse this
We're going to pause
interruption.
here.
At this time, teachers of students